Saturday, February 2nd, 2019, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning I want to talk about the crisis of 2008, and not only that, but the whole system, monetary financial system since 1914, and how the crisis of 08 was actually just when the system, the analogy is when the Titanic hit the iceberg, and that we're still on the Titanic, and the reason why it didn't sink in 2008 is because the system has been going on for so long that it's just part of the whole process, and eventually, unfortunately, the only way to it's not repairable, the system or the Titanic, and it will sink, and you need to be prepared for it. I'll also go over some of the other books that I recommend. Some of you have said, please talk more about your books on your shelves. So yeah, I'll go over some of them that I think are really important to read. I mean, a lot of the knowledge that I have, of course, was market knowledge was acquired through experience, working in the financial markets, working in the City of London, working for different banks, brokerages, talking to people, but also reading. You need to read. You need to keep, in my opinion, knowing about history is really almost as important as knowing about the present, because the history, of course, repeats itself. Billy is here. He's just had his breakfast, and he'll probably go to sleep in a minute. So before I go into the books, I want to say why I think it all started in 1914. And we have to remember that back then the dollar was not the reserve currency. It was pound sterling or sterling. And it's interesting that in this book that I talked about yesterday, and I'm already almost coming towards the end of it because it's so good. One of the characters, it's The Mandibles, by the way. One of the characters talks about how there was no inflation in Britain, really, on average, since 1300 to when the pound lost its, or sterling lost its, how can I say, reserve status. You'd have to say it lost it between the two wars, World War I and World War II. But I like to go back to when Isaac Newton, who was the master of the mint, the Royal Mint, in the early 1700s. He designed the gold standard in around 1705 or 07. Not sure about the date. I'm not going to go in too much into the Wikipedia. I'm just going to talk more about what I know in my head. So it was basically from 1707 to 1914. Sterling was as good as gold, basically. And it was the reserve currency, mainly because of that. And a lot of the Keynesians say, well, that was... And it was a period, the pound, you could buy as much as you could in 1707, in 1914, so there was no inflation. So that's, and the world system, we had a gold standard, and it wasn't perfect, and it was just started in the 1800s. Different countries joined at different times. The US only joined, I think, in 1900. Before that, the US was on a bimetallic standard. It wasn't, and of course there was the Great Crime of 1873, which was passed as a coinage act, but it took silver away from being legal tender. It was legal tender, but not for above a certain amount. But that's a different story. So that's where, up until then, I would say the whole world, with the leadership of sterling, and I'm not going to go into the British Empire or anything like that. This is more about the system and the economics and the monetary system. It wasn't perfect. Of course, there were wars in between. The Napoleonic Wars. Britain went off gold for about 20 years, but it went back in around 1818. But then I think the century that we've had of inflation, increasing government, size of government, increasing wars, they all go together. And I think we're still part of this. And is it any wonder that the powers that be keep pushing for more and more wars? And I'm not saying we're going to have a war, but it's a possibility. So what I'm trying to say is that, oh wait, yes, it was a crisis where the system could have completely gone. But the powers that be and the bankers and the politicians still had some ammunition, which was us, the taxpayer. They could still inflate quite a bit, and they did. But they didn't fix the Titanic, and I think we're slowly, it's happening. The time scale is different than in 1912 when the Titanic sank. And the Titanic, in my opinion, is the debt, of course. And nothing's been fixed. The system's still a system that's based on the monetary system and the banking system being able to issue credit with no anchor. Of course, in 1914, that's when it really kicked off, because after a few months, all the major European powers who were in that war, it was called the Great War, they all went off the gold standard. They suspended the system that had worked really well for a few hundred years. And why do they do that? Well, because it's very difficult to finance wars in a gold standard. You run out of gold. So you give an excuse that you're fighting for survival, and you have to print, you have to issue these warehouse receipts, which are banknotes, backed by nothing, and people accept it. And then you have the horrors of war, and then the war is over, and the last thing people are thinking about is the monetary system. So that's how they were able to get Europeans to forget about that. But not completely, of course. In the 20s, the UK tried to get back onto the gold standard under Chancellor of the Exchequer, Winston Churchill, but it failed. And then in the early 30s, Britain abandoned the gold standard, and all the other European countries did as well. The US, even though the Federal Reserve was created around 1913 and started operating in 1914, makes you even wonder if the purpose of the Federal Reserve had anything to do with World War I, but that's a different subject. That's for you to contemplate. In the U.S., of course, as the U.S. benefited greatly from World War I, because it only joined in 1917, and it was the supermarket, the warehouse for all the material and the weapons and everything to Europe. U.S. took a lot of gold. So U.S., by the end of World War II, the U.S. had like 2/3 of the world's gold. And the U.S. is still, internationally, there's still a gold standard run by the U.S. because the U.S. had all the gold. Domestically, of course, 1933 is the big date for the U.S. Because it went off the, sound money domestically. You still had silver coins, but silver was not a standard anymore, was not legal tender. You could only pay up to a certain amount. So the U.S. Was on a domestic fiat money system. You couldn't have... gold was illegal from 1933 to 1975. They confiscated it in 1933. So it's all been gradual, and that's why I think 2008 and it's been frustrating, of course. I remember working in the city. I worked there until 2012. So while I was there in '08, I was prepared. I had been accumulating gold. I didn't have much debt. And I was thinking, wow, this is going to be scary, but I'm prepared. But then they saved the system. And it's going to be, I don't know how long they'll be able to keep the Titanic cruising, but it's only a matter of time when it will completely sink. And I hope that with my videos, I can help people prepare themselves, get on the lifeboat, so to speak, through acquiring physical gold, physical silver. And there's a lot more that we need to learn. It's not just about physical gold and silver. And that's why I'm reading this book here. And I'm almost finished, and I'll come to it probably tomorrow or the day after with my conclusions about when the system fails, when everything implodes. And it's going to be, it's going to make the crisis we've had in the last 100 years look like a picnic, in my opinion, because it's not like a correction. It's going to be a complete implosion of the system. Hopefully, I know this is not cheerful information, but I'm going to be truthful, and hopefully, the ideal thing is that the Titanic could keep cruising along. This is fiat money system, the system we have of big government, huge credit, spending. Basically, we've been consuming the future for the last 100 years, and especially in the last 40 years. So that's why I think it will eventually come, there'll be a day of reckoning. So with that, I'll look at some of the other books that I recommend here. And I just said The Day of Reckoning. Well, there's one that was written quite a while ago, back in 2003, I think. Financial Reckoning Day, Surviving the Soft Depression of the 21st Century. William Bonner with Addison Wiggin. I read this, even before the '08 crisis. And I think they've been right. It has been a soft depression, but it could get even worse. So this is the book, the first one. It's on my shelf. It says, Financial Reckoning Day. History shows that people who save and invest grow and prosper, and others deteriorate and collapse. Well, that's true. Unfortunately, recently, the people who borrow and spend have been doing better. Things have been turned upside down. That's one of the comments here on the back of the book. Who else makes some comments? Advanced praise from best-selling authors. An investment book that will not only enlarge your investment horizon, but also make you laugh and thoroughly entertain you for a few hours. Dr. Mark Faber, author of the bestseller Tomorrow's Gold. Financial Reckoning Day is in the category of scintillating sex or good vision, something to be savored and enjoyed before it is too late. James Dale Davidson. So, recommend this one to my viewers. The other one, and it's an old one, it's called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay, or Mackay. It was written in 1841 by Charles Mackay. And it's got different sections. The first one is the Mississippi Scheme, the Mississippi Bubble. Then you have the South Sea Bubble, the Tulipomania, the Alchemists, Modern Prophecies, Fortune Telling, the Magnetizers, the Crusaders, Witchmania, Duels and Ordeals. So it's all about delusions, popular delusions, and madness of crowds. And I think, if Charles Mackay was around today, if you republish this book, you need to put on the last 100 years, the madness of crowd, to think that, debt is wealth. So that's why I recommend this book. It shows that human nature never changes. One of my favorites is Murray Rothbard's America's Great Depression. And he talks about, the reason why the Depression happened, the Roaring Twenties. He doesn't, it's the contrarian view. He shows how trying to keep sterling in the gold standard, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York kept interest rates too low, and it created the Roaring Twenties and the stock market and the bubble of the Roaring Twenties that led to the collapse in '29 and the Depression. A lot of times the mainstream economists tell us that the Fed didn't do enough after the stock market crash, but what Murray Rothbard is saying is that the Fed did too much before that. So I highly recommend that. It's more academic, this book. What else? Gold Wars, The Battle Against Sound Money as Seen from a Swiss Perspective by Ferdinand Lips. And that's a classic as well. Highly recommend that. And someone commented the other day when I was talking about books about trading, and they said, you should look at Security Analysis, Benjamin Graham and David Dodd. Well, I do have that book right here. And it's like, I think Warren Buffett, that's his disciple, Benjamin Graham. And it's very interesting if you want to learn all about analyzing stocks, bonds. It's very technical. I have looked into it. It's not a book that you read from front to back, but there's different sections. One thing I would say, though, is this book is written in 1934. And what happened in 1934? The dollar was devalued against gold, the Gold Act of 1934. But in spite of that, Benjamin Graham never mentions that in the book. And I think that's important to talk about as well. So that one. What else have I got? Yeah, James Rickards. He's written a few good books. Currency Wars, The Making of the Next Global Crisis. Recommend. I've got some other ones by him. The Road to Ruin. So hopefully, I'm not going to put a list of these books below in the description. I think you can find them, wherever you want, Amazon or anywhere you look. I'm not sure, wherever, you can find PDFs for these books. I used to put a link for Amazon under an associate's program, but to be honest, I got a pittance from Amazon, and they hardly, they take ages to pay me, so I don't want to. I just let you guys look and see where you can find these books. 2008, that was just part of the journey, in my opinion, from 1914 to, I don't know, is it going to be 2029? Is it going to be 2019, 2021? I don't know. Or it could be 2039. It doesn't hurt to be prepared. Yeah, because once it happens, you won't be able to, prepare yourself. It will be too late. So if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, share it far and wide, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. I wish you all a great weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.